Welcome to my world, bro.
I'll edit that out, don't worry.
Yeah. Bro, you can't take me anywhere.
Welcome back to Food in General, a podcast presented by Sunday in General that looks to explore the nuances of food through candid conversation, information exchange, and opinion commentary. Today is part of Series 1, where we look to understand our food businesses in a post-COVID-19 era. I'll be chatting to Jono Feuvre and Robert Cowles from Rosetta Roastery here in Cape Town. As always, I'm your host, Luke van der Merwe, and thanks for tuning in. In this conversation today, we look at coffee as an e-commerce model and the challenges that lie with that. Both John and Rob share their optimism on reopening, and we try and reimagine what the cafe space will look like in a post-COVID-19 era. This conversation took place in level 4, and we chat about the moral dilemma that they faced on deciding whether or not to open up for takeaways. And even though we've now gone into level 3 here in South Africa, I felt it too important to edit this out. I feel like we still need to highlight the challenges that our small business owners have been facing during lockdown. Both John and Rob are such inspiring humans, and I'm so honored to call them both friends and fellow coffee professionals. All that they've done for the industry and continue to do for the industry is just incredible. There are a couple of audio issues. Jono is actually sitting in Rosetta Cafe when this conversation took place, and there's a couple of grinders in the background. But I hope that gives you a sense of sitting back in a coffee shop and smelling that freshly ground coffee and feeling the buzz and the chaos and the vibe that we all love when we sit in a coffee shop. So let's dive straight into it. So, Jono and Rob from Rosetta Roastery, welcome to Food in General. Thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Cool.
I have had quite a few conversations with Jono, so I guess, Rob, to just open it up, tell us how you're doing. I mean, I know how Jono's doing. He's got like an army of kids, and he's probably like just trying to be a homeschool teacher, so we don't have to ask him that question. But how are you doing? How's lockdown going? What's keeping you busy apart from trying to figure out the future of your coffee business?
Yeah, good question. I think definitely not as much as Jono, although I do have a little one arriving sometime in the next, I don't know, 2 weeks or so.
Cool.
So I guess
congrats, dude.
Yeah, gearing up to welcome to Jono's world, which I think he's been waiting for a long time to say I told you so. That's obviously exciting. And definitely realizing that I need to, this kind of process of not recalibration, but this kind of new perspective we've had on life and work is, I suppose, fed into. It's felt very apt for my situation, realizing there's some bigger changes coming. Anyhow, so yeah, I guess that's where we're at. But good.
That's awesome. All right, it's a good thing to keep your mind busy, which is awesome. I think. I mean, I'm nowhere near the point of becoming a parent, but I'm sure it's super exciting. And I know a few mates that have just brought kids into the world. They seem to be probably the most happiest out of anyone in lockdown. So that's awesome. So as a responsible new podcaster, I try to do some research on Rosetta Roastery, which I didn't really need to do much on. Because you guys, for me, have always been an inspiration and a leader in the specialty coffee industry in South Africa, and you've given it so much. But one thing I did stumble on, which I want to chat about before we get into the nitty-gritty of everything here, was Citizen Kane. And
how did you find that?
I mean, it's on your website, right? So now I'm like sitting here on Rosetta's website. So I'm sitting here like looking at this and I'm like, okay, wait, hang on. I read about Citizen Kane, which, for context to anyone listening to this, is a band that you guys started when you were living in digs.
We did once pack out Mercury Live.
I want to just paint a picture here of what I see. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I like envision Jono with like slightly longer hair doing his like inner Dave Grohl Nirvana thing on the drums. And then I see Rob as the jazz guitarist for like a Jordan Rakasi, just like I mean, how accurate is that?
So no, so this is, I'm going to jump in here. So Rob, we had about 20 kgs extra on him of pure muscle. Would rip his shirt off at the beginning of every gig, and he was the drummer at the back, just thundering away on this massive kit.
And Jono, what were you on? Were you the bass guitarist?
It depended on the song, actually. I played a bit of electric and bass.
Let's talk about COVID-19 and coffee. I think one of the things that I've noticed you guys do, and you were sort of like, for me, the first guys to jump onto the online retail for coffee. And that's maybe because you were shifting your focus even pre-COVID to some sort of an online model. But I just want to know sort of how's that helped you guys, and what's the shift and the adjustment been from cafe retail to online coffee retailer?
To be honest, when we first started, we were just a roastery, and the idea was, well, let's use this kind of new web platform. I mean, it's 10 years ago, which isn't that long ago, but I think people's buying behavior certainly changed a lot in 10 years, or some may say it's changed more in the last 6 weeks than it has in the last 10 years, even though the technology has been there. And John and I probably have had different ideas or different opinions on how valuable e-commerce would be. And I think even 10 years ago, I mean, we had a very makeshift kind of website, but it's always been there. But the adoption has been relatively low. And I think, initially it was like, well, actually to get a website that functions the way we want is going to cost us, 70 grand or something to do. You didn't have all these kind of subscription model Shopify's and whatnot that give people lots of options today. And then realizing that people perhaps didn't buy as much in that fashion as we would have hoped, and you kind of have a customer base that does order online, et cetera, and does their thing, but you realize that your commercial clients are the ones that are actually going to be paying the bills. And so we had recently kind of upgraded and fixed some elements on our site and had started kind of pushing into that a bit more, but definitely we've seen a big uptick in the last couple of weeks. So we were, I think we were kind of ready for it, and there's a lot more that we obviously can do. But yeah, actually our aim in the beginning was to hopefully have a significant percentage of our business kind of B2C via e-commerce, because we didn't ever want to go the kind of distribution route with big chain FMCG kind of stores. It just doesn't fit our product. There's no ways we could really spend time merchandising shelves at Pick and Pay and feel like we were doing justice to the product and hit price points, etc. So we were always trying to have that kind of direct model. And so it has been nice to kind of see, hopefully, people's buying behavior change a lot now, realizing that they can shop differently and they can be a bit more engaged in what they're buying, and it's feasible. So that definitely helps. I mean, generally, if you were to go prior to all of this, if you were to look at our model, I think that obviously the turnover of the cafes is important, but that's where a lot of the costs reside as well, all the staff and, the capex and all of that makes that an expensive operation to run. And I think most people in the retail space have battled probably for the last couple of years anyway, so since 2016, 2017, it's been tough going. And so if you've done well and lasted through that period, I suppose you used a little bit of hardship, and hopefully people are just going to survive through this period and then be able to start up again. We absolutely do need that wholesale business. For us to just survive on e-commerce is, I mean, if you do the maths, it becomes a very different kind of creature to just be cut out for that. We'd be needing to send out, hundreds of home orders a day, and the margins on those orders are often not great. I mean, we pretty much subsidize the delivery fees to quite an extent at this point. And I think the other challenge in e-commerce with, relatively small bundle items is that, people are buying to consume. And if you can buy one bag a week, then that's great. If delivery is covered or at a marginal kind of increase, then you're not going to buy 6 weeks supply, and I think a lot of e-commerce, just carries the small baskets because they know that the big Magimix sale or, 2,000 Rand pair of trainers or whatever is going to balance that out. So for us, the average basket size is never going to be more than, a couple of £100 probably. So yeah, it's quite difficult to run a model purely on e-commerce, especially with, I think, the logistics framework in this country, which I think will continue to improve a lot, but it's still, I mean, if you were to look at what you can get in the States and how much it costs to get it to your door, that's why people shop like that. Whereas here you're paying, whatever it is, percentage-wise of your basket, often quite a big percentage to get it delivered to you, and often not super efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. So if we can bring those costs down, I think that'll help everyone in e-commerce. And I have noticed like a proliferation of maybe like tech-driven new companies coming into the space, maybe specializing in local delivery or regional delivery. So hopefully that'll improve that model. But yeah, we absolutely need wholesale to come back. That's for sure.
That's also specific. We're referencing the numbers from an online side, but what Rosetta is a team of 12 coffee professionals who 8 of them are trained in face-to-face interaction, coffee education across the counter, beverage preparation. Like, those guys are part of the family and need to get back to work. So it's one thing to go, can we be sustainable as an online roastery? It's another question to go, well, how can we get the family back to where they're supposed to be and where they've been trained to be? So I think those are, I know Rob was just answering that one question, but there's that other question that's in the back of my mind going, yeah, maybe we could figure a way out to do online, but there's an entire team that have been trained to be what I believe is the best team in the country for what they do. And yeah, so that's kind of what's I'm trying to think is like, how can we get them back to work? But yeah, different question, I guess.
No, I mean, it's not a different question. I think it's the question that most people that are sitting in your position are asking at the moment. It's, everyone's throwing out this word pivot and adapt and cool, let's move our business online. Let's do this. The restaurant industry needs to pivot. But at the same time, it's like, how do I pivot but still maintain being able to pay these 8 people, which are the best team in coffee in South Africa? I mean, I can say that with all confidence because you guys know that I frequent a lot of coffee shops, and going to Rosetta is like, it's a whole different experience. And I think, I wish we had answers. I don't know how you can move to an online model but still maintain or still be able to pay staff. And just, I guess that's why we're having these chats, is to hopefully come out with a solution, but it's not that easy. It's no secret that the restaurant industry is run on super thin margins, but the margins are probably even smaller on a cafe, especially one that's like primarily focused on coffee. You have the same overheads as a restaurant. You've got the rentals, you've got the staff, you've got the big equipment costs, but you're selling your product for what, a third of the price?
Yeah, it does. I think to make a cafe work in this country is exceptionally hard work. And it's tough to say that because obviously we want to see more and more cafes, especially focusing on specialty coffee. Because I don't think, that's another whole debate, but I don't think that is represented as well in this country as it needs to be, or that people realize that name actually should be associated with a different experience. And yeah, we don't have the foot traffic that we need really to sustain it for most people in most locations. So it is a challenge. And really you end up selling other items so that you can sell coffee if coffee is your passion. And especially with specialty, we are paying considerably more than the average roaster or coffee shop is for their coffee, because that's actually what specialty coffee costs. And perhaps there isn't a space yet for us to charge what needs to be charged. And we feel it's important to charge that, not only just to look after the margins, but we also want the experience to be different. We want people to realize that they're coming in and it's not just McDonald's. It's not like, wherever you go, it's a generic kind of product and generic service, and it is what it is. You wouldn't treat food that way. But we've got to almost show the industry, this is what you're paying a bit more for. The staff are at a different caliber. The entire experience is better than what you're going to get at an average kind of establishment. So those are a few challenges that make coffee really tough. And for us, it's really been because we've had these other elements of the business that we can do that. Sometimes the cafes are generative, other times they're not. but they're important to us for sure.
Yeah, it's such an important discussion to have, and it's one that I've actually earmarked for us to have when we can actually all sit down around the table and drink a coffee, because I think that is a conversation that will hopefully bring a lot of insight into what it actually takes to run a specialty coffee shop. From what I can see, it doesn't look like you guys have had to let anyone go, which is quite fortunate. But moving forward, what does it look like for you? If you are happy to obviously discuss it, if not, obviously there's no pressure. But
there's the top 3 guys on the will soon be leaving us list. We won't disclose those names. No, I'm teasing. I think Jono, I don't know. I feel kind of optimistic. I don't know why. I mean, part of me, I was saying to Jono that Kevin Johnson, who's the CEO of Starbucks, they've been looking at their trends across the world, and China, who's, I guess, as far ahead, at the head of kind of people kind of heading back to some version of normality. And apparently the public's behavior has been quite encouraging there from a hospitality side, that their sales have really picked up nicely. So I'm hoping that that's a trend. I feel like there's a lot of this entire thing, which is, people following best practice, what the WHO tells you to do and what someone else has done, we all tend to do. And I think that's this kind of weird kind of globalization thing where sometimes our behavior patterns are more based on what we see happening elsewhere, not necessarily linked to our specific circumstances. But I do think that, people take the lead of other people's behavior elsewhere. So if the rest of the world is kind of saying, look, we figured out a way to do this, we do actually want to go back to the office in some shape or form, and we can go to restaurants and, that kind of thing a few months from now. We don't know, but I'm hoping that maybe our kind of doomsday scenarios aren't as quite as bad as they may be, and that a couple of months from now we've got people wanting to be out and engage with one another, engage with stuff in a way that is responsible, but doesn't, no one's going to survive on 60% turnover. So we've got to figure out a way we can kind of be masters of our own destiny as a community, or as a people at large. So I'm hoping that happens, and that we can push through a couple more months and then figure out a way to make it work with all of our staff. I feel like everyone's going to be overstaffed probably for a bit. So that's my perspective now. Maybe 60 days from now, things will be quite different. I don't know, Jono.
My optimism is, it's definitely shared by, I shared it with you, Rob, but I'm just not sure if that's due to a lack of certainty about anything. People respond to uncertainty in different ways. Some people get super pessimistic, and other people, hang on to hope. And I think maybe that's just where we're at. The truth is, I have no idea what sales levels are going to do, and we have no idea when level 3 is going to come. And so I think what we've done in the now is to ask for help, which we, in one sense, we try to take responsibility for our own team and fund salaries internally, and make the sacrifices that we need to. But we've reached a point now where we are asking for help. We're saying, if you guys are going to support us online and you love our coffees, consider tipping for the team that is making it all happen. So I think, and there seems to be an amazing response from the public, from the consumer, understanding their responsibility in this whole thing. So, which actually taken me by surprise to see how many consumers want to give a little bit extra. So I'm optimistic, but I also realize that it's a huge task, and that if we don't get the response that we've seen so far, if we don't see the consumer continuing to support in that way, I think it's going to get tough. But that said, I hold on to the irrational optimism.
Okay, so now we're at the point in the conversation that I referenced in the intro, where I selfishly ask John and Rob to open up their cafe at the Silo district, bearing in mind we're still in level 4 when this conversation took place, and you were only allowed to leave your house for essential items. By me asking this question, it opened up the conversation into the legalities of opening up for takeaway during level 4, as well as the moral dilemma and the questions that John and Rob were asking themselves.
Is a coffee shop luring people out of their essential services run? So a place like the Waterfront, it's debatable, and so it comes down to, whatever feels right kind of thing. We have a little internal, moral framework. When we're unsure about something, it's like, well, do whatever feels right. And usually it's like, if you don't want anyone to know what you've just done, you probably shouldn't have done it. And I think we're still at the point where I'm not ready to shout, hey, come find us, come chill in the cafe, or it is a little bit difficult. But if we can, I think we need to wait for level 3 personally. And I know that there are guys opening. I know, it's difficult. Like either we perform our civil duty, or we become part of the population that says, I don't care what the government says. And the moment you're part of that little sector, you then in my mind, you've stepped out of the protection of the system. So you can't ignore the government when it infringes on your conveniences, but then expect it to do its job the rest of the time. To me, that's not a coherent worldview. And for that reason alone, I'm waiting on their lead, flawed or not. I mean, they've clearly made a lot of mistakes, but that's not really an excuse to defy the current legislation, in my mind. So if we can convince ourselves that we are on an essential services run, I'll open takeaway in a flash. And I mean, I think we've discussed this already. Rob and I have discussed it. In Woodstock, there's a spa right here. It's right next to us. That's a more logical step, but there's no one around. So it's just not worthwhile right now. Yeah, I don't know. That's my take. And Rob and I are obviously still working this out. Like, I don't think there is one simple, straight answer. But I do think that if you're not mentioning the term civil responsibility at some point in your conversation, then you haven't had the entire conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a moral dilemma that everyone's facing at the moment. I don't want to. I saw some cafes that opened a week or so ago, and I had a chat with Kaylee, and I was just like, is this responsible? Are they even allowed to do it? Are they breaking the law? But at the same time, who am I to sit here and judge? It's like everyone's in their own situation. They got to do what they got to do. And, at the end of the day, I think it's better we support them than we don't. If they land in hot water, they land in hot water. The irony is, if they land in hot water, the industry is probably going to stand up for them anyway. So, it's a moral dilemma that I, for one, don't envy anyone sitting in your position.
I think we're all just hoping that we can get a bit of clarity, and maybe in the next week it's a little bit less kind of up to everyone's own interpretation. I think that, there's so many frustrations, but definitely one of them has been, like, you've said one thing, but you're policing it in a different way, which is encouraging people to just have to make their own decisions. And that's not helpful, So let's see, but really trusting that we get an announcement in the next couple of days and that they make it more clear.
Have you guys thought about much on what it looks like to reopen the cafes? Screens between machine or barista and customer. I mean, how do you put? And I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just throwing it out there. How do you put 2 people behind a coffee machine? And that's not 1.5 meters. It's just. Yeah. It's something I've been thinking about. I don't know if you guys have given it much thought.
Yeah, I think it is a difficult one. I think maybe I thought a little bit more about the interventions we'll have to have on the customer side. I mean, we know that our guys are having to work in closer proximity than that regularly. And I think this is the difficulty for me, is realizing that there are a lot of different opinions on actually really what's going on with the virus and how it's transmitted and how effective any intervention really is. And you end up feeling like, well, I still have to do things because of legislation or regulation or public perception, even though I'm not at all convinced, given what I've read or interacted with, that's necessarily an intervention that's required. So everyone's got a different take on that, but that is quite difficult. I mean, we've spoken to other friends of ours and businesses who are spending an insane amount of money on, staff transport in isolation, personal protective gear. And you're going like, well, if I'm spending 50 grand a month on those kind of interventions, but as a result, like 2 or 3 people aren't employed anymore, it's also kind of bizarre. So there's all these kind of weird moral kind of dilemmas that it puts you in. I don't know how they're going to police that. We know that our staff are going to be in closer proximity than 1.5 meters on occasion. Like you said, that's going to happen in any kind of working kitchen. You can't separate everything up into individual stations. It is an interesting one. I think it feels like we will probably get into line with what people are doing elsewhere, and there'll be mandatory perspex screens all over the place and that type of thing. I think if you're ahead of the curve, maybe you're spending money on that kind of thing now, if you have any money to spend.
As a coffee business, like, you can't afford to be spending that, especially when you've got customers that are complaining about 35 Rand flat whites, which is the conversation we'll have in the future.
I know in some countries overseas, they've apparently perspex, you just cannot get it anywhere. It's just gone. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think all the corporates and banks in Hong Kong and China have bought those all up. Fit out their cafeterias. In my mind, it's safe to come to a Rosetta, because I know you guys are, I mean, Jono, you've told us now, you guys are going by the book, you going according to everything. I was there yesterday, a timer went off and Nikki was like, I need to wash my hands. I trust you guys to uphold hygiene standards. And, I think let's hope the public perception of all of that is a positive one.
Yeah, well, I'm just interested to know, you talked about screens for staff members, over tills and across counters. But I'm also interested to know what a cafe's seating plan looks like. I know in Napa, there's a whole lot of wine bars that are now, they've got rid of all their chairs and tables, and they've got essentially, those little islands that you step inside. So you've got your own table around you. And it's just like, I can't tell if it's satire or not. It's like, oh, is this highlighting how ludicrous it is, or is this for real? And maybe the best sort of satire is always a little bit ambiguous. But in my mind, that doesn't make any sense. So, trying to craft a space for people to spend time in. That's what cafes are, right? You're crafting the space for people to spend time in. But they're not going to be able to do that. So is it even worth trying, or is it rather like, well, let's think about our space in a different way, and understand that no one's going to be in it for longer than 5 or 10 minutes. So do we change the way the cafe operates? Does it cease to become a cafe, but is still a space that can turn profit? I mean, those are the questions I'm asking. It's like, if no one can sit at all our chairs and tables, what can we use the space for creatively to, I don't know, continue to have turnover without having bums in seats? I don't know. I don't have answers either.
It's time for the standing room only cafe to kick off here.
I mean, the perfect example of this is, look at Pauline's. They opened up as a stand-up coffee bar, which I thought was like friggin' awesome. They then had to adjust their whole model to being sit down. Oh, and then enter COVID, and we're probably going to go back to stand-up, because that's how the best possible business model for them.
I mean, the Italian coffee bar has always existed like that. It's like really limited footprint. And sure, they've got a whole bunch of other ridiculous challenges with their market there who refuse to pay more than €1. But at the same time, people are having, I thought it was 3 or 4. I think it's more like 6 or 7 espressos a day. And they're taking three minutes per espresso and then leaving. I'm not saying everyone, but there are a lot of people, from my time there last year, that's how they live. And so that's how the cafes can kind of survive, is just guys are busy all day, and people aren't, you're not paying a huge amount of rent per customer because they're not hanging around very long. So I think obviously our mindset, and this is for the whole kind of Western world, I guess, it's not Italy, has a bit more of a comcayer type mindset with their coffee, and they want to spend time, and it's a time to connect with friends. Whereas in Italy, it's actually about, this is my kind of like a smoke break, and I'm going to just say ciao Romano or whatever over the counter, and 1 or 2 of my mates will be there regularly because we're all here 10 times a day, and it's kind of a social thing, but it's more about being in that space as opposed to, I'm going to sit and occupy this territory and spend 50 Rand and be here for 1.5 hours with my best friend. So it's kind of like, can we adapt when socially we're not really built like that?
I used to despise people that sat on Wi-Fi in the cafe for so long. And in my mind, hopefully those days are gone, with everyone now adjusting to working at home and that sort of thing. And now we can pop down to our local cafe as like sort of a break, away from the computer.
One thing that's nice is that, actually being engaged in what you're doing, even if it's for 10, 12 minutes,
Yeah.
You're actually looking around and having conversations with people, which I think a lot of us have lost. And yeah, we don't go down that road. But when you know that no one in the cafe is even really making eye contact with anyone else, they're just looking at their phone and then they're sitting down looking at their computer, definitely doesn't have the same kind of vibe that maybe a lot of us were looking for in the beginning, to find that third space, which was, whatever, guys having beers around the table or coffee, whatever it was. But there was a vibe and there was a sense of like, I'm actually connecting with the world outside of my little bubble.
I mean, I thank you for this conversation, because for me, it sort of brings me a bit more hope and a bit more optimism, which is awesome, because I do miss coming down to the shop, and I do miss the interactions that we have. So to end off here, what can we expect on a coffee side, Jono? Have we got any exciting beans coming through? What can we look forward to post-COVID?
Rosetta's been really lucky in that just before lockdown, we landed some amazing shipments of genuinely exciting coffees. So we've got 2 new Indonesian coffees that are now online. They've just gone onto the site. And I mean, you know what we're about. We're always looking to find those coffees that do things slightly differently. So there's one of them is called Frinsa Lactic, which is, if you're into wine at all, like a Chardonnay goes through malolactic fermentation. Although you've got a coffee undergoing a very similar process, taking some quite bright organic acids, converting them to lactic acid, which gives you this rich, creamy mouthfeel. So that's a fascinating coffee. And I think even better is that we've got a more conventional washed Indonesian from the same estate right next door to it. So you can order a kind of twin pack of the washed and the lactic ferment together. And then we've also got a super exciting fresh Peruvian coffee on the site. Rua Danier is the new Peru worth looking out for. And then the Frinsa Sigara Utang is a very particular seed type grown in Indonesia. And then the Frinsa Lactic. Those are the 3 I would look out for.
Awesome.
Rob, any I've forgotten?
I think this is the time of year where a lot of coffees are starting to become available. If anyone knows anything about kind of coffee harvests, a lot of regions where they would have obviously harvested earlier in the year, some harvests were late this year, and now you're starting to get options available. So that's always kind of an exciting time of the year. And I think it's also our 10-year anniversary, like I said, this year. So at some point, it's been pushed back a little bit, but we're hoping to have some kind of special edition coffees that come from some like really interesting estates or projects that we'd like to bring some exposure to, and we think would be an apt way to celebrate. So I guess we've been going through a process of trying to find those coffees now, even if we'll have them a few months from now. So yeah, that's been fun. We won't say exactly what we're drinking, but we're still on the hunt for exactly what we want.
I think one of the things that you guys did, which I thought was so cool, was the COVID packs and the sample packs. And I hope you continue to do that.
Well, watch this piece. We're developing a very cool system where that can actually be rolled out perpetually with new coffees coming in, because we saw how people loved having to guess and learning through the guessing process. So we actually do have a product that we're going to be releasing in the next month or so, which does exactly that and lets people regularly engage with fresh coffees, new coffees, sometimes coffees that we won't even release because we don't have enough of them, but small samples will go into these mystery boxes. So that was a massive positive that came out of lockdown, was us discovering how much people want to go on the journey with us.
Jono and Rob, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for the chat. Again, such a good chat for me. I've got a lot more hope for the industry that I was a part of for so long and that I have such a love for. And I look forward to more mystery packs and a 10-year anniversary coffee, which is just got me so excited. So, guys, thanks so much for
Thanks,
the chat.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Awesome. And that's another Food in General conversation. Thanks for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jono and Rob from Rosetta Roastery, and I hope you gained some insight into the world of specialty coffee. Both Rosetta's cafes are open at Woodstock, the Woodstock Exchange, and at the Silo District, the waterfront. So please, if you feel like grabbing a takeaway coffee or if you need some beans for home, pop in, say hi to their team, or jump online and order some coffee via their website. They do offer home delivery. Next week I'll be chatting to Eming Lin from Muse Farm and Daniel Smith from Abulobi. Both these individuals represent organizations that are transforming the way that we interact with food and produce. And in this conversation, I hope to spotlight the impact that the restaurant shutdown has had on the food supply chain, and more specifically on small-scale farmers and producers. As always, if you have any ideas for the show or if you want to get in touch, please just DM me at Sunday in General or shoot me an email at sundayingeneral@gmail.com. That's it for now. Cheers.